Okay everybody, so today we are thinking about product development and we're going to make a basic scone recipe and then think about different flavours we could use in that scone recipe. So you could use whatever flavour you want using this basic recipe. So I'm just putting 200 grams of self-raising flour into my large bowl, so the largest bowl that I have got in my house. And I'm measuring out 200 grams of self-raising flour. You could sieve it if you want to put a little bit more air into your mixture, which might make your scones a little bit fluffier. I'm now going to take my butter and I'm using 50 grams of butter and I'm measuring it out with my scale. It could be butter or low-fat spread. And then I'm going to coat the butter in the flour so that it's not sticky on my fingers. I want to try and keep my fingers as clean as I can. So then once I've coated it in the flour, I'm breaking it up into little pieces to make it easier to work with and then coating those little pieces with flour again so that they're not too sticky on my fingers. Then we're going to do the rubbing in technique. So you take the tips of your fingers and you pull all of the ingredients, the flour and the butter, into the tips of your fingers and you rub really quickly with the tips of your fingers. That's the tip, that's the key to it, is rubbing really, really quickly. You don't want to squeeze using your hands because you'll melt the butter in your hands and it'll go all lumpy. You want to get rid of the lumps. So I'm giving the bowl a shake and any big lumps come to the top. And I'm just going to keep rubbing with the tips of my fingers. I'm just showing you there that it is the tips of my fingers that I'm using. And I'm letting the bowl lean against my belly so it doesn't fall onto the floor. And I am lifting it nice and high out the bowl and rubbing with the tips of my fingers. And the higher out the bowl you lift your fingers, the more air you'll put into the mixture as well, again making your scones nice and fluffy in the middle. So it should look like breadcrumbs. Fine breadcrumbs are a bit like sand. Sometimes I would say it looks a little bit like sand. We don't want any lumps, so that's what you're aiming to get rid of. But once you get it to that sand type texture or the breadcrumb texture, you don't want to continue rubbing in because if you do, then it'll start to go lumpy again. So it's quite a fine balance. So you need to make sure that you stop when you get to that stage. Okay, so now is when I need to start thinking about the flavouring that I'm going to put in. So I've decided to go for a savoury scone to start with, and I'm going to go with a bacon, believe it or not, onion and cheese. So bacon, red onion and cheese. So I've just put 2 rashers of bacon under my grill and I'm going to let them cook whilst I chop up my onion really nice and small. So I want nice fine pieces of red onion. I've chosen a red onion just for appearance sake, so I want it to look nice. So I want to see the red onion through my scone. So as you're eating the scone, you should be able to see the nice flecks of red throughout the scone mixture. I'm peeling both halves of the onion and I'm keeping the root of the onion on. Always remember to keep the root on because that's what holds it all together. Then I'm cutting down with my sharp knife until I get to my fingers and then I do a bridge over the top. And then I'm just trying to manoeuvre myself so you can see in the camera. Then I'm going to go the other direction and I'll end up with fine dice. So the smaller the pieces the better, so you're trying to keep your knife as close to the edge of the onion as you can. Do the same thing with the other half. So just slicing all the way down through all the layers of your onion, and then when you get to your fingers, a bridge over the top, turn it round to the side, and slice along the way and you'll get nice fine small squares or dice of onion. So obviously you don't have to use onion in your scones because it's your flavour, it's whatever you choose to put in your scones. So these are the flavours that I've decided to go with. I think that these 3 ingredients will go really well together. So I'm going to try them out in a scone. I've never tried a cheese, onion and scone before. So this is completely new and different. It's a developed product, something that hasn't been seen, definitely not in Asda before, because we've already checked the Asda shelves and we saw that Asda only had some plain scones and sultana scones, so we're making something a bit different. So I'm just now putting some cheese in. I've just gone for 30 grams of cheese, just to give it the kind of salty, cheesy flavour. And my bacon should be cooked now, so I'm going to get ready to put that in as well. You always need to put your ingredients in whilst the mixture is still dry. You don't want to put any wet ingredients in there because you won't be able to then add the ingredients in after that. After you've got it into the dough consistency, you won't be able to add your ingredients in. So you always remember, I've forgotten a few times, always try and remember to put your ingredients flavour-wise into your scone mixture before you add any milk. I'm just chopping my bacon up. I'm actually keeping it quite large, the piece is quite large, because when I'm thinking about eating the scone, I want to be able to see the bacon through it, and I definitely want to be able to taste the bacon through it. So I'm keeping the pieces quite chunky. But again, it's entirely up to you. If you're developing your product, you might want it really nice and small. So you're just getting the flavour rather than the texture of the bacon. So this will be probably quite a salty flavour, so I'm not going to add any more salt to it because I've got my cheese and my bacon, which both give a salty flavour. And I'm mixing it through just with my hands. Hands are always clean. And then I'm going to start adding some milk. Now, I'm randomly putting an amount of milk into that jug there. It's around about 100 ml roughly, but I'm not measuring it exactly because you'll tend to find that once you start doing this, sometimes one scone mixture will take 100 ml, sometimes another scone mixture will take 120 ml. So you start off with an amount in your jug and then you can either add more later if you need to, or you don't need to use all of the milk that's in your jug. So I've made a hole in the middle with my knife, just a normal butter knife out my drawer. Made a hole in the middle called a well, and then I gradually add the milk, so really slowly. If I put all that milk in there at once, I can't take any of it back out again. So that's always the theory behind this. If you add all of the milk at one time, you can't take it back out, whereas if you add it very slowly, you can keep adding until you get it to the right consistency. And the right consistency, we're looking for a dough mixture. So you can see that it's starting to come together. I'm starting to get little lumps of dough. And I'm pushing it against the side of the bowl to see if it's going to come together with my knife. There's still quite a lot of dry bits in there, so I'm going to just add another little bit of milk. Now you could use a spoon to help you here if you want, so you could use a large tablespoon of milk at a time, and that would probably be about 5 or 6 of those spoons that I've got in there. And then I'm just going to use my hands to bring it together. So once I think I've got the right amount of milk, I'm going to then use my hands in the bowl to squeeze all of the mixture or the dough together, and all the bits of bacon and cheese and onion, I want that through the dough mixture so that it's even all the way through as it cooks. So I'm squashing it down in the bowl until it all comes together. But you'll see my hands are not sticky with dough at all, so the dough isn't too wet. My hands are still relatively clean. They don't have lots of sticky dough all over them. Because I've got it to the correct consistency, I haven't added too much milk. Now if you do make the mistake and add too much milk, you could put a little bit more flour in it until you get it to look like mine. But hopefully you'll manage to get it right first time. So I'm now just going to use my hands to make sure that all of the bacon and the cheese and the onion are squeezed all the way through the dough. Don't want them all just sitting on the edge. I want to make sure that it's all right the way through the dough so we get the flavour all the way through as we're eating it. I'm going to make my scones a little bit different shape-wise. So usually if you were getting them in the shop, they would be a round shape, wouldn't they? So we are going to start off with a round dough. So that's why I have made my dough into that round shape to start with. Just used my hands to get it into the shape that I want it to be, so it's a nice round circle. And then I have found my rolling pin. If you don't have a rolling pin, doesn't matter, you can use a bottle of any description, anything that's that kind of shape. And then the rule is forward, back, quarter, turn. So I'm going forward, back, and then turning it a quarter. Forward, back, turning it a quarter. And you need to do that wee quarter turn every time, so that the dough doesn't stick to your table. And you can always use your hands like I'm doing to get it back into your circle shape if it starts to come out of that shape, if it starts to lose its shape as you're rolling. So you want it to be about 1 centimetre thick. So I'm rolling out until I get it to the right thickness. And if it is a little bit sticky, then all you need to do is put a little bit of flour on your table or on your rolling pin. That'll stop it from sticking. I think I've got a little bit of water that's come out of the end of my rolling pin. I think I had been using it earlier and it's still been wet. So that's why there's some water on the table. So I'm going to put a little bit of flour down because it's just starting to stick because of that extra bit of water that's come out of the rolling pin. And I've put a little bit on the top too. Just be careful, don't add too much flour or you'll make the scone dough very dry and it'll crack. So you just want enough to stop it from sticking. And I'm still going forward, back, quarter turn, forward, back, quarter turn with the rolling pin. And then I'm using my hands to get it back into the circle shape again, because it started to lose its shape slightly. Okay, I think I'm quite happy with the thickness, so it's about 1 centimetre thick. And like I said, I'm going to do this in a little bit of a different shape. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut this into little triangles. So I've cut through the middle once, twice, and then through each of those cuts once, and then I should end up with 8 triangles. So 4 triangles in each half. And I just marked it out there with my knife to start with so that I was happy with the shape before I moved on to actually cutting through. So I made sure that I was happy with it before I cut right through the dough. And then I need my baking tray. And I need just a little bit of flour just to stop the dough from sticking as it's cooking. Don't want it to stick to the tray and then having to scrape it off and breaking all your scones as you take them off. So I'm just popping them onto my baking tray with a little bit of flour, not too much. And that's a really different flavour of scone that you probably haven't tried before. I know I haven't tried it before. So this is a developed product, something new and different. Now, one of the key factors of a scone is that really nice golden brown crispy topping that you get on it. So to achieve that, I need to put some either milk or egg wash on the top of my scone before it cooks. I'm just going to clean that down before I put my tray on. And I've got a little bit of milk left in my jug, so I'm just going to use that. And in your house you might have a pastry brush, or you can just use your fingertips. So I'm just using my fingertips to take the milk and paint it on top of my scone mixture. And that gives it that nice golden brown look when it comes out of the oven. It makes it nice and crispy on the top. That's called glazing your scones. So they're going in the oven now at about 200 degrees for 20 minutes, and then I'll check them after 20 minutes to see if I'm happy with the colour and the texture of them. So I'm going to move on to another flavour of scone now. It's exactly the same mixture, so I could have technically made the basic mixture once in one bowl and then split it into 2. but I just found this a bit easier. So it's just 200 grams of self-raising flour, 50 grams of butter or margarine or low-fat spread, whatever it is you've got, into a large bowl. And let's see if you can remember what the next step is. So once you've got your ingredients in, you coat the butter in the flour to stop it being sticky. You break the butter into smaller pieces and then coat those with flour to stop them being sticky. Nothing worse than butter all over your hands, melting butter all over your hands. And exactly the same thing, tips of my fingers, dragging right down to the bottom of the bowl. I sometimes think of that as being like a digger. So it's like digging right to the very bottom of the bowl, making sure that all the flour is incorporated into the butter, and the tips of my fingers, I'm rubbing them really, really quickly. I'm not squeezing to melt the butter, I'm rubbing really, really quickly, and that gives me that breadcrumb texture that we're looking for. Give the bowl a good shake, any large lumps will come to the top, and those are the bits that you want to get rid of. So you keep going until there are no large lumps. So the first scone that I made was a savoury scone. So this one, I'm going to make a sweet version. So usually for sweet scones, you would have either just a plain scone that's got a little bit of sugar in it, or you would have a fruit scone with some sultanas or raisins through it. Sometimes you get cherry scones. I remember my nana having cherries. But this one is really different, the idea that I've come up with. So it was just some things that I had in my fruit bowl and in my cupboard. And I thought these two flavours will go together really, really well. So I'm going to make a caramel apple scone. So I've got two just small red apples from my fruit bowl that were actually just about ready to get thrown out. So this was a good use of them. And I'm just chopping them in half through the middle of the core. And then I'm using the large holes in the grater, and I'm just keeping the skin on again for a little bit of colour. And the skin's actually really good for you. It gives you lots of fibre. So I think we've talked about that in one of the other recipes before. So it gives you fibre, which is good for your bowel. It prevents things like constipation. So it's really good for us. Also makes you feel fuller for longer, so you're not going to be wanting a snack anytime soon once you've had this scone. And I'm taking the apple and I'm going on one side of the apple, then flipping it round. And then all I've got left in my hand is the core. And then I'm going against the skin so that I'm not wasting any of the apple. And then in my hand, all that's left is the core. I'm doing that with all 4/4 of my apple. Using the large holes in the grater, remember, you don't want those teeny, teeny, tiny holes where all the apple will get stuck in them. So this is a really different flavour that I've definitely never tried before, caramel apple scones. But I think they sound great. I'm putting quite a bit of apple in there, so that'll give it a really good sweetness. So I shouldn't need too much extra sugar in here. I'm just going to put my apple straight into the bowl, so just using the grater to slide it off my chopping board. And then any extra apple that's stuck on my grater, I'm just going to get that into the bowl so that it doesn't go down my sink, and so that I'm using it in my actual mixture. That was inside the grater, it was stuck inside. And then you always use a knife when you're making a scone mixture, and you are just using that to mix the apple through. Now, apple is quite wet, isn't it? So it's got quite a lot of moisture in it. So we shouldn't need as much milk as we did the first time round. We should really need a much smaller amount of milk because there's so much moisture already in the apple. That'll help to bring the dough together. So I'm going to put a little bit of sugar in here. I'm just going to weigh out 20 grams of sugar. You actually probably could go and do this without any actual sugar in it as well, because there is enough sweetness in the apple and the caramel that I'm going to put in. You wouldn't need to use the caramel if you don't want to, you could just have apple scones. and I'm mixing the dry ingredients through with my knife. And then this was my favourite bit, adding in the caramel. So I don't know if you've ever had like a banoffee pie before, something like that. But this stuff here is carnation caramel. It's just a tin that you'll get in any supermarket. I actually thought I had some in the house and I didn't, so I had to run down to the shop and get some. So it was just in my local shop. And I'm using 50 grams of this carnation caramel. So it's like the stuff that you get in a banoffee pie. That's what you would use to make a banoffee pie. So again, it's quite wet in texture. So again, I shouldn't need too much milk when I go to add my milk to my dough, because it's already starting to come together with my knife, with the apple and the caramel that I've added in there as well. I'm just making sure that I get all of the flour from round about the sides of the bowl and mixing it in with all of the more wet ingredients. And then I'm going to need to judge how much more milk I'm going to need to be able to bring this into a dough. But I definitely know there's no way I'm going to need as much milk as I did the first time round. So I've still got a little bit of milk left in my jug from my first lot of scones. So that's about 15 mils I think I've used, roughly. I'm just giving it a really good mix right round all the sides of the bowl to make sure all the dry stuff gets mixed through into the wet ingredients before I put my hands in to bring it all together. A little bit more, so it's maybe 30 mils roughly. And then I'm going to use my hands to squeeze all of that dough together. Now again, it's exactly the same as the first time round. I want to make sure that the apple is all the way through the dough mixture, not just on the outside edges. So I'm squeezing it through, and it is a little bit more wet on my hands, but my dough definitely isn't what you would call too moist. It's not sticking to my hands in any way. You can see that my hands are clean, roughly clean. And I'm going to start off again. Okay, so I'm just putting a little bit more flour on just because this dough is a little bit more moist, a little bit more sticky than my first one that we had used with the bacon and the onion and the cheese. So I'm rolling and turning, exactly as I did the first time round. So forward, back, quarter turn, forward, back, quarter turn. That's the rule, so that it doesn't stick to your rolling pin and it doesn't stick to the worktop. I'm just using my hands to make sure that it stays in that circle shape, because I'm going to cut this one into wedges the same as I did the savoury scone. And again, I'm rolling it out until it gets to 1 centimetre thick. And just stuck to my rolling pin just a wee tad there, so a little bit more flour on the top until I get to 1 centimetre thick, making sure I've got that nice circle shape before I cut it into the wedges. So I'm just taking my knife, and like I did first time round, I'm just doing a little indent first of all to make sure that I'm happy with the size of the wedges, because I want them all to be the same size so that it looks good for the people who are eating it, so that everybody's got the same portion and so they all take the same amount of time to cook. Then I'm using my knife and I'm cutting right through the dough until all of the wedges are separated and able to be lifted off the worktop. Baking tray again, a little sprinkle of flour just to stop the scones sticking when they're baking. And then, I don't think I said this first time round, you are best to try and keep them separated a little bit just in case they rise quite a bit and then they start to touch each other. And if they do, they could get stuck together. So that's why I've got a little space in between each of the scones. And then those are going to get popped into the oven for 20 minutes once I've done my milk glaze on the top. So again, I'm just going to clean the worktop so that the bottom of the baking tray doesn't get all covered in flour. It's always good to clean as you go as well. So this time I'm going to use my pastry brush just to show you that I've got one in my house. But again, if you don't have one, then you can use your fingertips in the milk. It doesn't make any difference. Your hands are always clean, cleaning them throughout the recipe. Just going to put a little bit more milk in my measuring jug because I have finished it all. Using my pastry brush this time, just to paint the milk on the top. And like I said, that's called glazing the scones, to give it a nice golden brown colour when they come out the oven. So that's your test for readiness, is the colour of the scones. So once they've been in for 20 minutes, the way you're going to test them is by looking at them to see if they're nice and golden brown and crispy on the top. So into the oven they go. And it's time to get my dishes done. Now I know a lot of parents and carers at home worry about getting their kitchens tidied, but you definitely can do it at school, so you can do it at home too. So here's my scones, nice and golden brown. They've been cooking for 20 minutes. I'm just going to plate them up. Thinking about my presentation, you always want things to look nice on your plate. We've been doing lots of work on presentation recently, so we want to make sure that we continue that. So I'm just giving them lots of height by piling them up on top of each other. Imagine seeing that in a cafe or something. That's the kind of thing that you would see, or that's the way it would look, all nice and piled up. And then you can garnish your scones. If you think about what types of flavours would go with each plate. So just like we've been talking about for the past couple of weeks about decoration and garnish of different products. So I've got my sweet product and my savoury product. So I'm going to go for just a little sprinkle of icing sugar on my sweet scones. So I've just got a little tea strainer, just a wee tiny sieve. You could use a big sieve. And I'm just gently sieving a little bit of icing sugar over the top. You still want to be able to see the nice golden brown colour of the scones. But just a nice dusting is what you would call that, dusting of icing sugar. And then on my savoury scones, I have got just some fresh parsley. I've always got some fresh herbs on my window ledge. So I've just chopped up some fresh parsley and I'm sprinkling my plate and the scones with a nice green fresh parsley. Just gives it another dimension of colour. And there we go. Sweet scones and savoury scones. Different flavours that we've never tried before. Have a go and see if there's any new different flavours that you guys can come up with. I'm sure you will come up with lots of different ideas.